morning. In the beginning, an autobiography of the universe. My autobiography and your autobiography. It's difficult to say precisely when I first began flaring forth, since like any infant, I have no conscious memory of the event. My scientist selves say I'm 13.5 billion years old, barely a teenager. Sometimes I feel like I'm not even that old, like I'm still being born. I know I recently achieved a meager degree of consciousness, what I like to call self-reflection, but this ability, this gift is, like me, still in its infancy. I remain mostly unconscious and am nowhere close to grasping the full meaning of my existence. Maybe someday as I continue to awaken or grow or evolve or whatever I decide to call it, the fragments of my experience will coalesce into some kind of unified awareness, and there will be no more need for my unconscious secret self. Maybe someday I'll feel whole. I know most biographies begin at the beginning and move linearly through time, so I hope you won't mind if I skip a little bit. It could take a long time if you do mind. For I really don't think that I can say much without first saying something about my human manifestation. Not that being human is any more important than or takes precedence over the rest of me, but because I have no conscious memories of my past beyond my human experience, everything I say about myself stems from my ability to self-reflect, to imagine what must have happened, to work it out logically in my mind, which seems to me is the unique thing about my having obtained humanhood. As I said in my manifestation as Thomas Berry, in my book, The Dream of the Earth, in reality, the human activates the most profound dimension of the universe itself, its capacity to reflect on and celebrate itself in conscious self-awareness. This is similar to what I wrote as Brian Swim in The Universe is a Green Dragon. The primeval fireball existed for 20 billion years without self-awareness. The creative work of the supernovas existed for billions of years without self-reflective awareness. The star could not by itself become aware of its own beauty or sacrifice. But the star can, through the human, reflect back on itself. In a sense, you are the star. Look at your hand. Do you claim it as your own? Every element was forged in temperatures 1,000,000 times hotter than molten rock. Each atom fashioned in the blazing heat of the star. Your eyes, your brain, your bones, all of you is composed of the star's creations. You are the star, brought into a form of life that enables life to reflect on itself. It's quite an accomplishment, even if I do say so myself. But being human isn't all it's cracked up to be, let me assure you. I've made a lot of mistakes since first entering my human phase a little less than 3 million years ago. I just don't have the hang of it yet, that's all. I know 2.6 million years seems like plenty of time to get some degree of expertise in just about anything, but keep in mind 1 billion seconds ago was 1981, and I'm nearly 15 billion years old. Even though I'm but a teenager, 2.6 million years is nothing to me. It's hardly a blink. Problem is, this human being stuff is so darn destructive and volatile, it may be my undoing, and everything I've worked so long and so hard for may end in hardly a blink. I guess that's why I'm saying this now, hoping to remind myself as best I can in my mostly unconscious and fragmented state of awareness that there's a bigger picture out there than I'm always aware of. If I can become mindful in my manifestation as the human species that I am more than human, that I am also in the beginning, and in the stars, and the starfish, in the grass, and the clouds, and the birds, and stones, and all other people and beings, no matter how different or trivial they might seem, then I think I might see a brighter day dawning yet. This little chemistry experiment may blow up in my face, but right now, as far as I can see, being human is also my greatest hope. Now let's see, where was I? Oh yeah, my story. Getting back to my flaring forth, or banging forward, or whatever you want to call it, I must say this was no small event. And I have to admit I was more than a little angry the day I was born. Who wouldn't be? There I was, all tucked away, safe and perfectly content to sleep in the quiet and comfort of my dark singularity, when all of a sudden, kaboom, I'm hurled out into this plethora of noise and light. Boy, was I hot. In fact, it took me several 100,000 years to cool down. But I'm glad I finally did, because that's when things really started happening. Once I cooled off a little bit, my subatomic particles were for the first time able to interact with each other, and I began manifesting myself as the first elements, hydrogen and helium. It's difficult to fully appreciate the magnitude of this accomplishment. Prior to this point, photons, that is my light, were the bullies of the universe. Other particles didn't fare well in my cosmic playground because light kept crashing into them and breaking them up. But hydrogen and helium are transparent, which meant light passed right through them. This enabled these atoms to start sticking together, forming huge galactic clouds that eventually collapsed in on themselves and formed the first generation of stars. Needless to say, I was quite the child prodigy. Only 1 billion years old, and I had already learned to become the first elements in the stars. Actually, though I may not sound like it, I'm really being rather modest. I didn't just make a few stars, I made lots of them. More than you would care to count. At the same time, you see, I was pretty empty, and vast regions of myself started condensing, forming a lot of black holes in the process. More like cosmic acne. These in turn caused density waves to stir many of my hydrogen and helium clouds that I created, which forced them to collapse into thousands of stars at once. Since there were about 1 trillion of these galactic clouds, I'd essentially created stars in all the galaxies at the same time, give or take a few million years. If I were prone to playing with toys as a child, I'd have to say the stars were among my favorite. Stars are like giant, easy-bake ovens, only not so easy. In them, after several generations of stars, that is, I forged all the elements: hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, and especially carbon, that would enable me to manifest myself as organic life. But there I go again, getting ahead of myself. As is obvious, or at least should be obvious, we can't have biology without ecology. So I had to start manifesting myself as something besides stars. I'd like to say I did it intentionally, but the truth is, I was throwing a bit of a tantrum. Or in galactic terms, I was throwing a supernova. If I recall correctly, the helium and hydrogen inside my star cells are extremely attracted to each other, which may be a rather sterile way of saying they love each other. They have passion for each other. We could even conclude at my most elementary level, I'm comprised of passionate love. But I digress. The point here is the friction caused between the love-making of hydrogen and helium causes the stars to burn. When these elements are all used up, however, my star cells may try to survive by burning a few other elements, but eventually I'm doomed to self-implode. On occasion, a few elementary particles called neutrinos rush away from the implosion and blow off into the outer layers of the stars containing elements like carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. Sometimes these elements reorganize as new stars, and sometimes they become planets. Of course, it was all a lot more complicated than I make it sound. Before I could accomplish anything, I had to formulate the 4 laws that hold everything together: the gravitational, the electromagnetic, and the strong and weak nuclear interactions. But these are more than I really understand in my limited ability to self-reflect, or care to get into anyway. The important thing to note is that by age 10 billion, I had manifested myself among other astral bodies as planets. We all know what comes next: life. Of course, I use this term loosely to suggest that I haven't been alive from the get-go. 13.7 billion years ago would be absurd. Biology might be a better word to use. Biology connotes a certain quality of life, just as human connotes a certain quality of biology. Naturally, it took a long time to get to be human. Of all my planet manifestations, Earth was among the few perfect for achieving biology. At first, however, I was entirely inhospitable. I was more like a boiling ball of red lava than the crusty blue planet I had become. In time, I cooled off enough to let the liquids remain on my surface, forming oceans that were charged for millions of years by an intense planet-wide lightning storm. In one of those billions of lightning strikes, a protocellular chemical reaction occurred which led to my manifestation as the first cell. The great thing about being a cell was that I could recreate myself again and again without the 10 billion years of fuss it took the first time. Simply by swallowing a drop of hydrogen-rich seawater and spitting out another identical me. Although my cellular memory is good, I must admit it isn't always perfect, which is why once in a billion reproductions I end up with a mutant cell. Call it a stroke of genius or a stroke of luck, these mutations are precisely what enable me to take on new biological forms, ever increasing in their complexity. In fact, if it weren't for the mutants, life on Earth would have ended a long time ago after the first cells exhausted their food supply. In my mutant form, I learned to eat the remains of deceased cells and harness their energy. Another of my mutant forms learned to eat photons, sunlight, which led to the process of photosynthesis, or feasting on the delicious sun. Still others learned to absorb carbon from the air, which eventually altered the Earth's entire atmosphere. These cells, which formed vast communities throughout the entire world, began excreting oxygen into the atmosphere. At the time, oxygen was highly dangerous to just about everything, including the cells themselves. Too much oxygen to fuel the flames and the Earth would turn into another cosmic fireball. Biology was again threatened by extinction. Had it not been for yet another mutated form of my cellular self that learned to breathe and transform oxygen, I'd have been sent right back into the Dark Ages, so to speak. Another important form of mutation came when I learned the value of sucking the life from other beings. I know it doesn't sound very appetizing, but at some point I began attaching myself to other cells, drilling holes through their membranes and feasting on their insides while using their DNA for my own purposes. To make a long story short, we eventually became dependent upon each other and formed a symbiotic relationship which led to the first multicellular organisms, which in turn led to the variety of complex biological life forms that have come and gone ever since. I'm quite proud of everything I've been able to achieve since then, although I'm somewhat embarrassed by all the attention given to the dinosaurs. I know T-Rex is a good look for me, but I have to admit the Saurian age was a big disappointment for me, if not a complete waste of time. I know 170 million years isn't really a lot of time, at least not for me, but The impatience of youth really turns me off to the fact that the dinosaurs get me no closer to self-awareness than I'd ever been. If it weren't for some freak accident that wiped most of them out, I'd probably still be snoozing. Even with all their faults, my warm-blooded manifestations have been able to achieve a degree of awareness in almost no time, especially after they were no longer threatened by my saurian tirages. I like to think of myself as the type who can give credit where credit is due, but getting back to my human face. I'm not so certain I'm going to be much better off than I was with Mr. Rex. Sure, being human makes me a lot smarter, but what good is this going to do me if the only thing I learn to do is destroy my earth self and all forms of life that I work so hard to achieve? As the genius Albert Einstein, for instance, I discovered a great deal about myself, about how I work through time, space, motion, gravitation, and energy. But so far, the best I've been able to do with this information is create horribly destructive weapons. And today, a nuclear holocaust isn't even the worst of my concerns. I've often considered the invention of agriculture my most important accomplishment during my Neolithic phase. Now I'm wondering if it wasn't another big mistake, the precursor of this anthropocentric attitude that says it's perfectly fine to interfere with my natural life forces and rhythms. Or maybe it was when classical civilization began, when I stopped looking at the earth as my mother and began worshiping male-dominator gods like Indra, Zeus, Thor, and Yahweh. In more modern times, I thought science might be the ultimate answer, but its technologies are so out of harmony with my natural ecosystems that I'm becoming one sick puppy. Sometimes I imagine a conversation going on between my cosmic parents. Dad says, "Honey, I'm worried. I think our child is human." Mom says, "Don't worry, it's only a phase." I sure hope she's right. Not that there's anything wrong with being human. I'm just worried about my self-destructive behavior. I've got to outgrow this thing. I hope I'll be around long enough to evolve into a being that can truly awaken my fullest potential, taking what is best about being human into the future as one of the latest elements that helps shape my next phase. Humans are an important part of the whole process, an important part of the whole, but they're not the whole. In the future, I'll probably look back and say humans were proto-conscious, not fully conscious. But my ultimate hope is to grow up and become a fully conscious being.